Good evening. I have no gavel. I'd like to call the Portsmouth School Board work session on April 7th, 2009 in session. And maybe we could take the attendance to see who's here and who's not here.
Okay. Rebecca Amerson?
Here.
Patrick Ellis? Here. Kent LePage?
Here.
Sherry Ham Garrity?
Here.
Dr. Schuldman?
Here.
Ann Walker?
Here.
Leslie Stevens?
Here.
Lisa Sweet?
Here.
Great. Well, thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank everyone for coming tonight. I'd like to thank JCJ Architects for being here this evening as well. Just a few brief comments to recap a little bit. As we move closer to the City Council taking up the bonding for the renovation and expansion of the Portsmouth Middle School, I've asked the architects to go back and take another look at the $40.8 million figure that they had given us a few months back in relation to the changes in the market. And we had done this for two reasons. One was if the number was lower, then I wanted that number to be known by the school board and to be presented by the school board. If the number remained the same, I wanted the school board to know that so that we could defend comfortably the number before the City Council. I've asked them to give us a brief, high-level recap, give us a brief history, perhaps of the evolving budget, but mostly to focus on new information and changing market conditions. I'd also like to say that there are certain things that are beyond our control. One of them right now is the question of the state building aid. However, I'm confident that the building aid will be a part of the final state budget. In these times, when the President is looking for an economic stimulus to revitalize our faltering economy, I just can't imagine the legislature or the governor being so irresponsible as to leave many cities and towns hanging. So I suggest we proceed with the faith that our state leaders will come through with the money in the end. Having said that, I think we should also be prepared for the City Council to possibly not take up their final vote of the second reading before they know for sure that there's money in the state budget. If I were them, I think I'd be a little hesitant to do that as well. But I'm confident that the first reading will proceed as planned on April 20th. The state budget should be all settled out by the end of June, so I imagine the City Council will take a final vote on the bond on or before then. And after tonight, I will notify the mayor tomorrow about our meeting tonight and hopefully suggest a lower bond number, although I'm sure he'll know about it before then. I know him to be a good citizen. He reads the papers, he watches Channel 22, and he listens to the radio, so I'm sure he'll know what we're talking about tonight. And with that, what I'd like to do is welcome both Jim LaPasta and Doug Roberts from JCJ Architects. Hi.
Hi. I guess that means we have the floor. Great. Thank you. It feels like a very long time since I've been here. It is good to be back. I missed you all.
Welcome.
We missed you too.
No, I did. Really. I'm going to make a very brief introduction as well, and Doug will do most of the presentation tonight, although I will certainly be part of it. About the same time that Dr. Schuldman had asked us to take another look at the budget, we in fact had begun to do that on a number of projects in the office anyway. And the reason is this is a very unusual time economically. I mean, everyone knows that, both good and bad. It's been a very volatile construction market, and after many years of truly skyrocketing inflation in the construction industry at 20–25% a year cost increases, which we had all become kind of used to, things really did begin to plateau last fall. And as you recall, when we met last fall looking at the kind of final round of budgets before you approved the budget at $40.8 million, we in fact had begun to see a leveling and had recommended a lower rate of escalation to account for that. We were anticipating that this spring we would begin to see construction prices come down as a direct response to the economy. And in fact, in some areas that has happened, and we had seen that in our own practice, our own work. We had several projects that we bid, projects that our competitors and colleagues had bid that were coming in lower. So we really began to do some research to see what everyone's best thinking was in terms of how long this might last, and what did this really mean in terms of what should we be budgeting. This is something we do pretty regularly in the office. As we had talked about last year, This budget is a budget that we put together. This is JCJ's budget, and we do look at a lot of sources. We look at industry-wide sources. We talk to construction managers. We talk to general contractors. We try to make it as specific to the town or the region as possible, but at the end of the day, it's something that we have to hang our hat on. We try to give you a budget that will be what we call a reasonable worst-case scenario. That's one that you should be prepared to spend as much as in the budget, but we don't believe you'll ever spend more than that, and there should be a comfortable cushion for the unknown. We are still at a very early stage of design in the middle school project. There are still many unknowns. There are many things we know, but there are many things we still don't know, and there are things you will not know until you actually begin construction. And so each step of the way we'll be updating the budget. So this is the normal process that you would go through. Every time there's new or better information, you look at your budget, you tighten it up, or you increase it, or you reallocate funds from one column to another. The reason we have contingencies built in, as we've talked about, is that as we go through this, those contingencies will get reallocated as contingent items come up, and we need to actually put them into the hard costs. So that said, what we will present tonight and what we've given you is a budget that is slightly smaller. We have seen decreases in some construction materials. We've seen certainly a more competitive bidding climate. The big unknown really is how long will this last? I mean, right, for projects that are bidding in the next 4, 5, 6 months, it is a very good time. The question is, and our crystal ball is, I think, no better than anyone else's, how long will that last, and what does that really mean in terms of if things begin to increase again, given your project schedule and where you will be when you're bidding, you know, what's our best recommendation to you for where your budget should be to give you that safe cushion to make sure you get all the project you want at a reasonable price. What I will also say in by way of preface is that we've made no changes to the quality or size or composition of the project. This was truly an exercise in looking at how much did those bricks cost last September and how much do we think they're going to cost a year from now when we go to bid. And it really was looking at the exact same brick, but knowing that labor is cheaper, brick is cheaper, and so forth, and trying to make a reasonable adjustment. So you'll see, as you've seen already, I'm sure you skipped to the end of the package, there is a slightly lower bottom line. We've also adjusted the budget to account for the waivers that last September we thought would be possible, now we know are approved, so we've adjusted the city share to also account for really two things: the lower construction cost, which impacts your reimbursement, but also the higher effective rate of reimbursement that you'll be getting, and Doug will explain very specifically how that works. So that's where we are. We again stand behind this budget. Nobody in the construction industry really knows what's happening. Last Friday night, I was at the National School Board's convention, and I happened to have I had dinner with the chief economist for McGraw-Hill Construction. They're the folks who put together Engineering News Record, reads construction data. He's one of the top, if not the top economist for the construction industry in the U.S. And his crystal ball is frankly not a whole lot better than mine when it comes to understanding where the market is, other than it's very volatile. And you know, some of the conversation we had with him on Friday, in fact, has also impacted these numbers as well in terms of I think giving you a realistic assessment of where you may be. So with that, having stolen pretty much all your thunder, I'll turn it over to Doug and let him walk you through really what sources we've used and really our logic behind how this came about.
Great, thank you. You should have received a packet of tonight's presentation, so you can take notes as we go along. You can also follow along. In addition, we distributed the schedule that I presented at the last board meeting, and it is in the packet, but again, you have a clearer image in the 11 by 17 format. And then in addition to that, you have a more detailed estimate that's in your packet as well. To simplify the presentation tonight, we went to the bullet point or the summary numbers. The 11 by 17 estimate that you have in front of you actually has more of the detail in that. With that, to framework our presentation this evening, as Jim indicated, we reach out to many sources to influence the decisions that we make when putting together budgets or estimates of probable costs. We will have a brief discussion on those indexes, construction indexes that we reference, what they indicate to us, what they don't indicate. In addition to that, we also have the bid results that I talked about at the previous meeting. We have more detailed information on that to share with you. As Jim also indicated, we've reached out to construction managers and general contractors, both regional and New Hampshire based, to get their sense of where the pulse is in the market today and what they see in their crystal ball. Again, all of these are influences or feedback that we receive to help guide us so that we make informed decisions for you. And again, I want to emphasize that the ultimate discussion will be about the schedule impacts, as we touched on at the previous meeting, as well as the overall estimate. But it is a reasonable adjustment to the estimate to have safeguards built in place to ensure that the Joint Building Committee has the opportunity to deliver the full academic program that was expressed by this board at the level of acceptable quality, so that this building will endure the 50-year life cycle that we all hope that it will. Okay, so that's the context, the framework in which we've made decisions here that actually recommendations that we'd like to present to you for your decisions. As Jim mentioned, Engineering News Record is a industry recognized construction index. It's a compilation of 14 other indexes that have been established for a while. The Engineering News Record started tracking construction materials and costs as far back as 1909. In 1921, they created what they call the Construction Cost Index. It measures, what they decided is rather than trying to track all materials, they needed to make that a more finite set of information because it was too variable. And rather than tracking it at every region, every city, they wanted to get a cross-section of the United States, so they started going to representative cities in regions. So they established the Construction Cost Index. They look at 20 different cities. They look at the cost of structural steel, Portland cement, lumber, and in the case of the Construction Cost Index, common labor. They felt that if they focused on those items, they can more readily react to the changes in the market on a monthly basis. It allows for more timely and accurate reporting of changes in the market. Currently, the Construction Cost Index is comprised of 80% of labor costs, the common labor costs. As the 1930s started, we started seeing the impact, or they started seeing the impact of union or skilled labor on the cost of construction. So in 1938, they established another cost index called the Building Cost Index. The difference there is it looks at structural steel, Portland cement, and lumber, but it looks at skilled labor costs or union labor. That is comprised of 65% labor, 35% materials. So the trend as established early on in the construction industry, which is true today, the largest portion of the construction cost that will impact the overall budget is the cost of labor. And we'll address that later in the presentation. Up on the screen, you do see four of the indexes that are included in the Engineering News Record index. One is the United States government, Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is specific to new school construction, and they are forecasting first quarter 2009, or they are reporting because it's historical reference, an increase of activity in school construction of 4.1%. There's a reason for that. School districts, much like yours, started the planning process 2-3 years ago. Money is in place to make sure that these projects continue. As we're seeing in Connecticut, we recently bid 4 schools. And so those projects are being recorded for 2009. And the forecast is that's an increase in activity, so the market is up. Conversely, you look at the Building Cost Index, that is at a decrease of 1.8%. Again, what you see there is a stabilization in the construction market in terms of the cost of materials. The cost of steel exploded in 2008. It has corrected. It's corrected to the point that steel is at production costs. It can't go any lower. The same is true with other materials as well. And there's a balance. Concrete is still volatile, but where it's high, lumber's low. So it's self-correcting there. And the real impact to the market right now is the cost of labor and what contractors, general contractors, and construction managers are charging for overhead and profit. That's the variable at this point. The good news is we do see the cost of materials stabilizing through 2009, possibly into 2010. But again, as Jim indicated, nobody has a crystal ball to know when the change in the market is going to take place. Again, the building cost index, excuse me, I said the construction cost index was 1.8 down. It's the building cost. Construction cost was down almost a percentage. And then RS mean, another recognized source of information for construction cost, it was down just over 0.5% in the first quarter 2006. Again, you're seeing a stabilization in the market. One that is most interesting is the Turner Building Cost Index. That is showing a decrease of almost 6% in the first quarter 2009. The range of the 14 indexes that ENR reviews, 10 reported decreases ranging from 0.5% to 8.4% decrease.
Turner Building Cost Index, is that Turner Construction of the
It is.
largest construction in the country
It
that
is,
builds the
yes.
majority of schools?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
And would part of that be that they're down because of certain areas such as California, which they're very heavily involved right now, is totally at a moratorium?
That has an influence over their cost,
Okay.
yes, because it tracks costs that they are experiencing in their firm.
I mean, there's maybe other states, but California obviously is one that they're heavily involved with.
It is, although they, I mean, I actually talk to them fairly regularly, and their national VP for marketing happened to come out of their Connecticut office, so he's an old friend. Last year, they had their best year ever, financially. I mean, they did more construction through 2008, so and they had a good backlog going into early 2009. This was as of, I think I saw them 3 weeks ago, and we were talking about it. So I don't know, I'm not sure that they've seen the downturn yet. I mean, they track their bids. They track what the costs are that's bidding. This isn't about, I just want to make sure we're clear, because maybe I misunderstood your question, but it's not that Turner is doing less work. It's that the numbers they're seeing from subcontractors, those are the numbers.
Correct, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
those are
their
the numbers they're seeing.
subcontractors are
Yeah, and
are a
California-
shadow of what they're
Right,
doing
yeah,
out there. And
yeah.
is there any, I'm trying to think of one of the other large firms that I know, do they do a building cost index?
Gilbane publishes
okay.
updates as well. In fact, we've talked to Gilbane because we do a lot. We're doing a lot of work with them now. We've talked to them. Certainly, both their New Hampshire and their Connecticut offices have been part of this conversation because we talk to them regularly and we share information. So some of their cost data, although they don't publish it
Not-
the same way that
Correct.
Turner puts it up on the web and they send it out to people and they make a big deal of it. I don't think Gilbane does the same thing, but internally they do have numbers that their estimators use, and well, you can share some of that because you had that conversation, but they do have internal numbers that they, all the big construction managers, these national ones like Turner, Gilbane, a few others, they have departments that do this and they track it and they make sure that their estimating departments around the country have kind of this current data, and then they share it with architects and engineers and others that are they're doing it. California is down. I mean, we do schoolwork in San Diego out of our office there, and there's definitely what's curious about California, as you raised it, is that last November they passed several $1 billion worth of bonds. They just don't have any money to actually give the districts. But the voters in San Diego County, for instance, passed $2.5 billion worth of construction bonds. We just got 2 projects in San Diego based on that, but the state's not able to come up with go to the bond market.
And that's the same like in the Vegas index right now, that they're totally down. They're not
down.
building right now for schools and stuff, and they need it for population.
Yeah, they don't. Las Vegas is one of the most hurting construction markets in the country, but
They've stopped, is it correct? Because I believe it's Turner that has 1 or 2 in the Vegas areas that are schools that, due to state funding, they've stopped construction until further.
I don't know. Clark County School District has been the fastest growing school district in the country for many years. They at one point 2 years ago they were opening a school a month, literally.
Yep.
Using a kind of this. They're in the desert. It's flat. They take the same building and they do 6 of them. Then they redesign it. and They do 6 more. The gentleman that passed away about 2 years ago, that was the head of that, was a real go-getter, and they just push that stuff out. I believe they've slowed down because Las Vegas is not growing, but I don't know that for sure.
Thank you.
I certainly know the hospitality work in Las Vegas has stopped.
Yeah.
The hotel work has come to a halt.
One last item I wanted to point out before we leave this slide is the Turner Building Cost Index. As you can see, as I reported at the previous meeting, third quarter, fourth quarter last year, construction managers reporting to districts that we're working with in Connecticut, costs are continuing to go up. And we had to repackage projects because there was a fear that they wouldn't, once they were put on the street to bid, they wouldn't be able to provide the full program. And as you can see, the cost sort of stabilized the third and fourth quarter, and then you can see the dramatic drop, pointer's not working, for first quarter 2009. So the graph shows it's very representative of the market conditions today. The bid results that I referenced earlier. Again, we have a variety of projects. Some are ours. Majority of them are JCJ projects, one of which is not. One is a government project. Others are schools, public schools in Connecticut. And as you can see, we had a variety of results. The Hartford Public Safety Complex, we went to bid with just the site work because the city of Hartford at the end of last year was fearful of putting the entire project on the street, given the bid climate at the time. They saw that those costs going up, so rather than committing $85 million for a project, they wanted to take it in chunks. Well, the first chunk was a site. It's the demolition of existing structures, hazardous material abatement. The budget for that was $2.575 million, and as you can see, the cost came in at just $1.8 million. That's a significant decrease. Again, that's 30.5% below their budget. In addition to that, the three schools that I referenced last meeting, where we had bid them in 2008, they came in over budget. So we retooled the documents, developed our base bid, and then nice-to-have items, the alternates that I addressed. You can see the bid results there. Center Road School, again, that's a renovation project. They had window replacement. They had handicap accessibility issues. This project was encumbered with an elevator that wasn't anticipated. We had a waiver from the state that the Bureau of Schools Facilities felt we had to replace. We had a conflict of interest in terms of the authorities having jurisdiction. Bureau of School Facilities is the funding source for school projects in Connecticut. They had the trump card, so we added the elevator. So as you can see, that project was slightly over budget when it was rebid this year at 2.5%. But again, that included an elevator that wasn't anticipated, and it had almost $1 million of window replacement that was desperately needed in the school. The way the referendum was set up in the town of Vernon, the monies were allocated for 5 elementary schools, so they're able to shift monies from one school to the other to ensure that they get the full program. And the other 2 schools that were bid, again, renovation projects. In this case, it was code upgrades as well as boiler replacements. In Northeast Elementary School, we're also doing a new kitchen. You can see we had similar bid results that we saw in Hartford, 31-40%. Then we had the 2 schools in Waterbury. Same program. They're pre-K through 8th grade schools, new programs on existing sites. The Duggan School was designed by JCJ Architecture. The Gilmartin School was designed by one of our competitors. But again, 76,000 square foot school. They had the same budget of just $21.5 million. And you can see they came in at about 2.5% under budget. Now again, the Gilmartin School was bid last year, third quarter. It came in $7 million over budget in September.
That was the other firms?
That was the other firms.
Just to remind you.
But again, trying to anticipate the market, that firm went back, recrafted their drawings, created a menu of options for the school board to decide, basically prioritize their needs, their wants, so that when the bid results came in, they could add back to the project the scope that they felt was most appropriate. Because of the bid market today, they're able to get everything, and they still have money. 2 other things that I'd like to point out. The Hartford projects and Waterbury projects are in, they have project labor agreements union contracts, and they have significant minority-based enterprise, women-based enterprise participation requirements. So there is some, while we can't qualify the cost impact, there is some cost impact. The Vernon schools were a GC bid. So again, it's a different way of delivering the project. Doesn't have as much overhead, if you will, as you do with the construction manager projects. But again, they're smaller in scale, best appropriate for a general contracting delivery. Any questions before I move on from this slide? So you can see there's a lot of volatility. We're trying to get a course so that we can make some recommendations. There's a question last meeting trying to identify what percentage of projects are new construction projects, renovations, or additions specific to New Hampshire. We weren't able to find that information for the first quarter 2009. In part, there aren't enough projects. Data hasn't been accumulated yet. But also, going back to the engineering news record, for the validity of the data, they look for a broader market. If you have more data entries, you have a more accurate picture. So the information that was available to us through the School Planning and Management magazine looks at the New England region, specifically Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. You can see that almost 60% of the projects that are forecast for 2009 are new construction projects. 15% would be school additions, and the balance, 25%, would be of school renovations. Interesting thing that I'd also like to point out in the footnote is the average cost of the construction. It's new construction. The average cost is $230 a square foot. Again, I'm pointing that out so when we get to the budget where we are, that was a metric that we looked at as well to test our recommendations for you. Also, the median students size school is 550 students.
Question though, on that same slide, the median cost of your building construction was $22,700,000. Is that?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's for 98,000 square feet.
98,000 square feet, correct. Okay, project schedule. Again, as I presented 2 weeks ago, this project schedule was adjusted with the optimism that the bonding would be approved in May and the joint building committee would be formed between May and June so that we could begin our work in July. And again, as we've had in past discussions, the impact of the schedule to cost is when do we hit the midpoint of construction? That's how we escalate the cost of materials and labor. It's based on where we are today to where we get to midpoint of construction, because that's when most of the contracts, if not all of the contracts, will be purchased or bought out. So again, using the same durations that we've had from previous schedules, it was about a 6-month slide from when we last presented the schedule. The impact to the construction duration, we were using 30 months of escalation in previous estimates. We're currently using the 32 months that's shown on the schedule. We also talked about decisions. There's been some discussion about expanding the gym to be a second gym, incorporating the Connie Bean Center program into the school facility. That would have impact on the overall schedule in terms of our ability to document that design change. It may have impacts in terms of any approvals that we would have locally. Typically, those approvals would be obtained at the end of design development, beginning of construction documents, so that if we were told that beginning of construction documents we wanted to add the gym, we certainly could incorporate that minimal cost impact to the district. The bigger impact would be we'd have to go back to planning and zoning and say, okay, the area that we had allocated for parking is now going to be a gym. We have to resubmit your parking counts and lot coverage. So there's pluses and minuses. There is flexibility as well.
So on that question of parking, that would mean we would need to go back to the state and reprove to them that in fact we have enough parking for our staff. If the gym goes up, if the second gym goes up, is that correct?
I would think not, simply because that is a community resource.
Okay.
While the school would have access to it, I don't know that you'd be adding faculty to cover that area. Could just allow you the extra elbow room.
I guess I'm just saying that we would have to go back to the state for
We'd be
parking,
displacing parking.
because we'd be losing
But that
parking.
would- Right. We'd have to go back to the state to prove that we had the 100 parking
Exactly, that's what I
stalls.
meant. Okay.
Any questions on the schedule?
Just I guess a comment. Sorry, Mitch. It'd be great if we're going out to bid right now. It seems very clear how the market is down, but bid wouldn't hit the street until June of 2010. That's what
Correct.
this is contemplating. And I think you mentioned last time that we were being somewhat aggressive with the 3-month, the 2 3-month windows for design development and the schematic design. Is that accurate? So,
Correct.
if anything, that might slide.
No, this is a schedule that we are confident that we can meet. Again, it's a cooperative effort. We'd work with the Joint Building Committee to make sure that timely decisions were made to maintain the schedule, and we'd help ensure that that happened.
But it would be predicated on the bond, the city council approving the financial arrangements in May.
That is correct.
Yeah. Which could be the end of June.
Correct. That's why we didn't start schematic design until July 1st. We had some fluff in there.
6 days.
We want to move fast for you.
A
Can't.
couple questions on it. Just, again, there's two ways, whether it becomes June this year, that the city council bonds, and we'll just use a number, you have a number here of $38.5 million thereabouts. And they go ahead and bond for that. But then the guaranteed maximum price, somewhere between a year from this June, and if I'm looking at this for the midpoint, the GMP would not be in place until probably, I'm going to guess, next September. A year from September, is that semi-fair? I mean, trying to get your guaranteed maximum price, where would you say that's going to hit?
I believe it all depends on how you contract with your construction manager.
Right, well, I mean, that's why I'm asking. There's one or two ways you're going to do it with a construction manager, and you're either going to have the price right up front, and you're going to say, you know, at $38.5 million, your guaranteed maximum price will buy you this. It's no different than going in and buying a car. And you know what you have. You're either going to get air conditioning or you're not going to get air conditioning because your budget will not allow for that. And I'm just trying to get the best time period where your guaranteed maximum price would be, because once this June comes and we bond into $38.5 million, we come back, as it was just pointed out, a year from now, those prices have gone up, we can't lock into those prices. Then, unfortunately, the JBC has to look at what does it have to go back to the board and announce to them what they can no longer have because prices have fluctuated that much. So whereabouts is that GMP going to be?
It would be at the bidding and award, because again,
So it'll be next
Just
June.
June, July, and I mean, again, you could get a GMP earlier than that, but I think it's unlikely you're going to get a
And
CM
this
that's
is the
going to
same
want
problem when we did the high school.
wanna do that.
Once you do your GMP, once you do your bonding, you know, you're kind of held at bay for that amount of money. And then all of a sudden, as you pointed out, a year ago, copper and most of your metals were double what they are today, if not more in some way. Copper actually is, you know, 3/4 down from last year.
Correct.
Not even, you know, on the radar. My fear is, in that whole year, there's an unknown on that, and we're locked into it. I mean, is there any suggestions that you give to the city council between now and when they make a decision to bond at X dollars?
well, I think we can cover that when we get into the detail of the budget. Because again, we wanted to, I want to paraphrase, it's best worst-case scenario.
reasonable worst case
Reasonable,
scenario.
reasonable.
Well, and I guess I asked because I cheated. I went ahead and I looked at your owner's contingency,
Correct.
which is at 2.5% now, where we started, and that's why I'm looking at this midpoint.
Could I just suggest, you know, because in terms of us all being able to be on the same page, to hold that question till we get to that point so we can understand what you're saying?
I would say, though, that this whole process that we go through is predicated on exactly the scenario you're talking about. Every project we do, every project we've ever done, we're always trying to anticipate through this budget process what prices will be a year from now. Because we typically, every community has to bond ahead of time, and our track record, frankly, has been very good. This is a little more volatile time, and
That's
it's
the
more
question,
difficult.
yes.
But our track record has been very good at making sure communities get the buildings they think they're going to get without significant change. And Doug will talk through what we believe the safety valves we have built into your budget are.
Thank you.
I think we'll answer it, and if we don't, push us on it, and we'll.
Okay, thank you.
So, do you want to, there's two questions before, and then we can move on? Sure. Yes.
At what point in the project schedule do we discuss sort of the staging of the construction and, you know, while we're constructing, where do the teachers park and where do the students?
Well, we already started that. I mean,
Okay.
we did have some of those conversations back last summer and fall when we went through the option right, option left, option up, down. Because we, at a very preliminary stage, that was part of, if you recall, that was part of the discussion. We will begin that conversation in earnest on July 1st, the day we start design, because that has to be taken into account when you first begin designing the building, because you don't want to, that will drive your budget. If you do that badly, you could find yourself in an untenable budget situation. So we'll have those conversations with John and with the board and the building committee from day one. And it's not really a separate conversation, it's just part of the design process.
Right.
We'll be constantly talking about it.
And one of the advantages of construction manager getting involved at schematic design is they begin layering that level of perspective on the development of the design in terms of how we phase it. And again, they'd look at the durations that we've had, and they'd also take a look at the site to see what they had for staging areas for construction materials. Again, they might have to do time of deliveries when materials are needed, just delivered to the site. They're not able to warehouse on site because you have limited area. That has an impact on the price as well.
Okay.
So we'd be working in concert with the construction manager to make sure that we had a complete answer for you.
Okay, so those conversations need to wait for the bond to be more developed in detail, you know, the construction manager. JBC.
Well, that would be a JBC.
Right.
It would fall under the entire design process, and we would work with the construction manager and the school to jointly figure out, as we're designing it, what the right phasing is. And then, again, like everything else, it will get more detailed as we get further into the phases here. The construction document phase will really begin to have to figure out where temporary walls are going and temporary stairs and sound partitions and all kinds of things that will happen further down the road. But we'll start talking about it right away.
Thank you.
Patrick, and then if you have any other questions about the schedule, that'd be fine now.
Regarding the softball field, is it the intent that the new field be constructed and a playable surface prior to the construction of the new?
That is the recommendation, correct?
And your schedule that you have laid out, I assume that there's an easy answer to this, but you're going to be awarding a contract sometime in July, but construction on the softball field starts in June. So are there two separate contracts? And do we even have a site fully identified and vetted as to where the softball field is going?
The answer to your question is no, the site has not been identified, and yes, there would be separate bids, different contracts for that. Another reason to have your construction manager on board sooner than later.
And so fundamentally, if the softball field is delayed, this whole
That has an impact on the ability to construct the new portion of the building that then becomes your swing space. So we can then backfill and do the renovation work at the second half of the phasing.
So I guess my question, I guess, almost to you, Mitch, is to what extent is this being pushed forward as a critical path item? Even if they pass the money, if we can't sort out where the ball field is going to go, we could slow the project down.
Well, we don't know exactly where it's going to go, and there have been recommendations that have been tossed around and suggestions. It's not necessarily, I think that would be a JBC decision in the end as to where it's sited. But the stump dump is the one that's been mentioned many times.
Isn't that being used as a staging area for that new bridge they're building?
That'll be done by then, I checked.
It will? Oh, good, okay.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Into the detail of the budget.
There you go. Okay.
All right, my apology to you.
What's
So I
that?
was putting the presentation together.
Yeah.
I was working off of previous presentations. This is really option left.
Oh, it just says right?
It's a test to see if you were paying attention. Obviously, I wasn't when I was putting it together.
Just for the record, before you start, we're going to get to that number, but the cost is not 38.5, it's 38.2, is that correct?
38.257.
7, right.
Correct.
Okay.
What I wanted to do is break it into two parts. We have the construction cost, and then we have the owner soft cost, consistent with previous presentations. Again, as you can see in the detailed estimate, we've highlighted a number of items in red italics. Those are the items that we've adjusted by 5%. Unit costs, labor costs, again, borne out by the bid results that we're receiving, and also through discussions that we're having with the construction managers and general contractors. Again, that is consistent across the board regionally as well as here in New Hampshire. It's also being reported that some projects are as low as 20%. But again, those are projects that are bidding right now, where there's zero escalation. They know exactly what those unit costs are. They can afford to do that. There's also concern that given the level of activity in the construction market, there are greater subcontractors bidding work or contractors bidding work, so there's greater range in the bid results. You have extremes. Whereas you might have 4 or 5 subcontractors bidding on a mechanical package, you're now getting as many as 20, 25. And with that, there's an awful lot of work on the part of the general contractor and construction manager to qualify those bids to make sure they're buying the total scope. So in a low bid, public bid, low bid format, you want, or environment, you want to make sure that you are buying the complete project. Firms are reporting that they are, in fact, bidding the work at their cost. There's zero profit on it for them. They're doing that because they feel that this construction market, again, it's their gut right now based on what they see, will probably be this way for the next 6 to 9 months. And then perhaps, just as dramatically as prices came down, prices might go back up because of supply and demand. A number of manufacturers and vendors are going out of business. You're going to have shortage of materials. Labor that is being released to the market right now will leave the area. So you'll have a reduced labor pool to draw from. And again, the school market is one of the 2 markets, as Jim had his discussion with the gentleman from McGraw-Hill. As soft as the market is right now, school construction remains a viable market, as does highway construction. So again, 2 areas that are most dramatically impacted by the stimulus package. So again, we didn't want to go to the 20% reduction. We were seeing some of those bid results right now. But again, the stabilization of the cost of materials, we felt it was reasonable to go to the 5% reduction. Question?
Yes. So to revisit part of Kent's question, you're comfortable with the lower estimate numbers here of $38.257 million, that if the market changes within, because if they're worried about remaining 6 to 9 months, so a year out when we actually go to bid, if they start to inflate, you're comfortable that the numbers you have and the contingencies built into the whole project are still adequate to build, as Jim said earlier, the quality, size, and scope that we originally talked about?
That's correct. One number in there is the multipurpose field at the high school, the synthetic surface. We used the actual quote that was provided by Russ Wilson. We didn't discount that.
Right.
But again, as Mitch pointed out, we do have contingencies that account for any variability in cost. You'll also see in the building construction number, we were at $140 a square foot for renovation costs. We're down at $130. Again, discussions that we've had with construction managers and general contractors, they felt that that number was conservative. We cautioned them that we still don't know an awful lot about the existing school. There still has to be geotechnical exploration of the settlement at the south wing. So until we have more information, that is a reasonable square foot cost for the renovations of the school. Likewise, with the new construction, we reduced that 5% down to $170 a square foot. Again, that's a reaction to materials and labor that we're seeing in the marketplace and what the indexes are suggesting to us today. We kept the contingencies for design and program and construction at 5%, and we've reduced escalation. Originally, we had it at 6%. As Jim mentioned, when we came back to you in November and December, we lowered it to 4.5%. based on all the conversations we're having with representatives of the industry as well as the indexes they're suggesting. And again, now, people are bidding projects with zero escalation. But again, I want to emphasize, that's today. If we had the documents on the street today, we would be recommending the same thing to you. Because we're a year out, we want to make sure that we safeguard that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot or putting the Joint Building Commission in a position where they can't deliver full-size scope and quality. So again, we're hearing anywhere between 2% and 3% escalation. We went to split the middle, if you will, between the 2 and the 4.5%, and arrived at 3 and 3.25. Again, safeguard. We want to be conservative, safeguarding the Joint Building Committee to be able to deliver the full project. And as you can see, the total cost of construction, okay, this is just the labor and materials, it's not the total project cost, is $218 a square foot. The regional average, as I pointed out earlier, was the $231 a square foot. So you're below what we feel this is a reasonable number for the region. Again, adjusted for the New Hampshire market and also today's bid climate, and it will deliver the full scope.
Kent.
If the project is on the construction schedule.
Two questions. First one is, under building construction, where you, and I know I've asked this before, but something doesn't calculate out right, and I'm sure I'm making a mistake here, is that you have renovation and new construction. New construction, no problem. Renovation, as I've said in the past, does not include that of both building demolition and site development. Is that correct? That's not part of the $130 a square foot, right?
That's correct. We are carrying those number in the site costs. Again, that was based on conversations.
Okay,
we
so
had
that
with
comes out of the
state.
site cost of the three.
Correct.
Okay.
It actually favors your reimbursable number from the state.
Okay, and I understand that, but that's, again, and it is not you, it is the building, because I went through this at the high school level. It's a deceiving number, because it's not $130 a square foot, because if you actually add in the $461,141,000, it's an additional, and again, my math wasn't too good on this, an additional $13.50 per square foot. I mean, you're shaking your head, so you know I'm in the ballpark when you talk. And I've never figured out why, other than you're saying we get a better rate from the state because of that. And probably, if I understand right now, in the building trades, the one thing that has not come down, yet I think I see a little bit of a reduction from you on it, on the large printout page you gave us, is demolition. Demolition is seeming to either stay the same or have slightly higher because of all the government regulations that have hit to remove, whether it be asbestos, whether it be anything. Those costs have actually had a slight increase over the last year and a half.
I don't know about the increase, but I do know that they are stabilizing. You know, they're not seeing the reduction that the other trades are.
Yeah. But, and again, and maybe others have had this question, I think in parentheses, right after you have renovations, it should have something there that just states that there's an additional, that this does not include the demolition, and have that little bit in there, because you get to it and then you do the numbers and you say, okay, is that number allocated in there? Second question I have is under the contingencies and escalations, is that, and I know it's on the next page, is the owner cost of contingency construction. Is that down the 2.5%? Because, again, that's actually still below the escalation for the 2.5 years or 2.67 years. And to me, when we originally began, that was even, was it above 5% when we originally had discussions?
The original owner's contingency was 5%. Again, when we revisited the budget back in November, December, we reduced that to 2.5%. Again, where we are in terms of the design, what we understand about the building.
Okay.
And again, the level of contingencies that we have for program construction and escalation. So again, it comes to where do you want to put your risk and how do you want to assign your costs so that we reduce the impact of escalation if we didn't include the owner's contingency on an inflated number.
Thank you.
Rebecca, you had a question?
Yeah, I have a question about the cost per square foot of the renovation for new construction, if we were tearing down the entire building and building completely new, then that cost would be, you'd have to add that to the cost of the new construction per square foot, right? So that is a reason why it's pulled out separately also? Because
It's cheaper. The renovation.
I'm
The
trying
demolition cost?
I'm just trying to understand, because I understand what Kent is saying, but if we demoed the entire thing and
Right.
built new and didn't renovate any of it, then that cost of the demo would then be applied towards new construction, and then that new construction per square foot would be higher than the 170. So I'm trying to understand why it's pulled out and why.
Yeah, it's the same logic.
Oh, yeah.
Using the same logic, you
I'm
could
just
argue
looking at
that,
different-
sure.
Okay. And then I don't really understand the whole owner contingency, and I don't need to, but if like the site acquisition cost, we have the allowance of $2 million. If that goes down, then does the owner contingency and the clerk of the works and other things that are based on the total cost, do those then go
Owner's
down?
contingency is based on the cost of construction. It's
Okay.
independent of the owner soft costs.
Okay,
Those
thank you.
individual line items that are out there,
Okay.
they're all
All right.
allowances.
Thanks.
Great.
Moving to the, again, option left, not option right. The equipment cost, we were carrying $18 a square foot for the FF&E. With case goods, again, we reduced that number 5%. That went down to $17 a square foot. You'll see that in the red on your detail. A lot of the project development fees are formulaic. They're driven by the cost of construction, so there was some adjustments in them as well. And the owner contingency at 2.5%, again, is of the cost of construction. So all total, the owner soft costs are at $9.9 million, arriving at the total project cost of $38,257,000. Any question on the soft costs before we move on? What I wanted to do is also look at the impact on estimated state building aid. And as Jim indicated, we want to recognize the success of the waiver process. So the area that would be calculated for building reimbursement was increased from the 101,800 square feet to the approved 129,015 square feet. Again, previous calculations were using the $180 square foot number. After inspection of that, recognizing that the state will reimburse you on your actual costs, the $180 a square foot is the maximum that they'll reimburse you. We adjusted this number to the blended rate of the $154.45 or 46. The net effect is the estimated state reimbursement would be $13,488,000. One of the benchmarks that Mayor Farini had put out there for the school board was to deliver this project under $25 million cost to the taxpayers of Portsmouth. And with this budget, we're just under $25 million at $24,769.
So just to point out, the building, the reimbursement of the square footage of 129,015, the whole size of the building is 129,765.
Correct.
So we came within 98%. I don't know the number.
I don't know the number either, but yes.
Pretty good.
Yes.
Right.
So where that number went up, the actual reimbursement square foot number we were using for the calculation came down some. But the net effect was more money for the taxpayers. That concludes our presentation.
Okay. No, thank you. Anybody have any, take a deep breath and think for a second and have any questions? Rebecca.
Thank you very much. So I guess this is a procedural question. Do we go back and re-ask for a less amount, or do we just wait for them to bond at the less amount?
Well, I think, I mean, I don't personally think we need to re-ask at this point. I mean, I think the mayor will know tomorrow, tonight, what the number is. That he'll talk to his counselors with that number,
Okay.
as opposed to the earlier number, because this is the number being presented to us, which I think we would all, I mean, if you'd like, we could take a straw poll tonight.
Yeah, I just
And get a
didn't know
sense
if-
of where people are on this number. I would be comfortable actually asking for that. Does everyone agree to want to do that? Okay.
What are we asking? I'm sorry, what is the question?
Well, the question is, would we recommend the $38.257 million? Just a straw poll to see if we're comfortable with that number. I don't believe we need to officially ask, but I will call the mayor in the morning and talk to him and present the number. Yes?
I don't think, I mean, I for different reasons, wouldn't favor a vote tonight on it. Basically, because this is presented at this time, city council has a number before them. They now have something that, you know, is going to be passed along to them.
Right.
I think we confuse it. I know that 98% of this material was given. I think the timeline was the only thing we got last week. So we only got this, and you know, questions may come up as I review this over the next week, and call Steve Bartlett to ask the questions, because, you know, I guess one of my biggest things, and somebody's going to pick up on it, we started at almost $54 million with a site, and we downsized the school a great deal. And when we did it, that took off the biggest chunk. And I think at that time, we were at about 44, almost $45 million. Right. And now we're down here, and, you know, it is a bidding war out there. People are going to want that. So I think we have to allow the city council the respect at this point to take their time, hand this information over to them, and say that, you know, there's some unknowns at this point, but this was presented by the architectural firm that we've had represent us through this process and are comfortable with it, and leave it at that. I think taking any vote before we, again,
I hear what you're
somebody
saying.
gives me $38 million and I make a decision in one night, shoot, I can't even make a decision on $10 some days.
Okay, no, I'm perfectly fine with believing that this is the number that they'll consider. I don't believe they'll consider the 40.8. So, unless somebody else has any real concerns about it, I don't particularly feel like we need to take a straw poll, but I'll leave that up to everyone else. I'm looking around.
No, I don't feel like we need a straw
Okay.
poll. I guess I'd like at least somewhat formal process for giving this information to the city council, though, whether they get a copy of
Get
the
this.
Well, I'm sure they will, Steve.
presentation, or,
I'm sure they will.
well, but isn't that our job to give it to them?
Well, I'll provide this to the city manager and city finance director in the morning, and they will
Okay.
do with it as they see
all I wanted
fit
to know.
for distribution to the city council in their normal schedule.
Yeah,
Perfect.
okay, great. Ann?
The other thing I was wondering about in regard to the stump dump, because since one of the first things that has to happen is the work on the field, I think that does need to be determined. Is that doable or isn't it?
And we will be meeting next week with the rec
At the
department,
work
rec board,
session.
so
Next
I know that's
Tuesday.
a
6
very
o'clock.
big question that they have at this
I
point.
believe so.
But who has the answers, I guess, that's the question.
That's
Yeah, the
No,
key
that's
point
not-
being that if it ends up being not viable, we
Then
need
what?
Plan B pretty quick.
Right.
Yes, we do.
Yes. Lisa?
Are we meeting with the rec board?
Yes.
Or,
Yes.
We
okay.
have a work session
Okay.
before our school board meeting next Tuesday night.
Okay,
We
good.
talked about that last time. It's at 6 o'clock with,
Okay.
is it it's the full board? Yep.
Yes.
And, where are we? We're meeting at Exchange. It'll be here. I knew that. Rebecca?
So that night, when we meet with the rec board, will we be talking about the Connie Bean addition?
Well, we could.
'Cause
Yeah,
well, I've been,
I'm sure they'll bring, yeah.
and because reading what the council said, and the city manager, it's a gym, and I'm just concerned it's not a community center. So I want a better idea of what the city
Okay.
is looking for.
I don't know if we'll know that, but we'll
I mean,
we'll
let me
talk about that.
just brief you. The rec board
Consultants, right?
hasn't gotten this information. We've only had a very brief discussion because in between our monthly meetings, this was brought
About
forth.
the Connie Bean?
Connie Bean.
Yeah, okay.
So, I mean, I
It's-
think the emphasis of that is that common needs between the rec board and the school, whether it be fields or buildings, is what they want to discuss. Future goals.
Ann?
And could I ask, is your consultant been determined yet, or have you?
You know, I know it, I know it has, but I don't think
care
it's,
who it
I
is,
can't,
but
I
it
can't
is
believe it's public at this time.
Determined, though?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a step in the right direction.
So just
It may be
focusing on
public, but I don't
on the middle school for now. Yes.
Just a quick question while JCJ is here, that's just popped into my head. I continue to be concerned about the start date and the fact that we've pushed the opening of the new school by another year. Is it your feeling that if there were a delay in starting the Phase 2 addition, since that is a kind of a freestanding structure, and it's not slated to be completed in time for the 2011-2012 school year, it would be complete in October. Is that something that could be pushed a month or 2 months without necessarily affecting the whole schedule?
You're talking about shortening the construction so it's done?
Not
before-
necessarily. I'm saying if for whatever reason, the Phase 2, which is the
Yeah,
classroom
I see.
gymnasium, if that were to be pushed by a couple of months, would that necessarily push everything else behind it?
Yes. If we don't, we have to complete the first phase, because that's the swing space. We're going to create the new classrooms.
Right.
Okay.
So that's going to allow us the ability to move the students from the existing structure into the new structure, so that we can then do the renovation work.
So to be clear then, there will be just some disruption in the fall of 2011. So this isn't supposed to be done until October. The students will be moving their classrooms.
Bob, Dr. Lister, sorry.
No, actually, I don't have any answer to this question. It's a good question. I think that's one of the things we're going to have to work for and look ahead and work with JCJ to see what their experience has been and look at what our resources are.
Okay.
I don't think we know that yet, but that's something that we've talked about since day one.
And one thing too, we'd work with the construction manager again, if there's a way that they can shorten that schedule so that it coincides with the start of school, that'd be preferable. We've also done move-ins over the winter holidays at the beginning of the new year. So again, they can adjust that schedule accordingly and hopefully in the end, maintain the overall construction duration as we have forecast.
Yes.
And next time you do develop one of these, I think maybe it doesn't matter too much, but if we could show the demolition in this as well and how that or maybe you can just tell me when that slots in, I'd appreciate it.
Could I just ask, and maybe Kent knows the answer to this question, the recreation survey that the city's doing, do you know when that's supposed to be completed?
Somewhere between November 1st and December-ish is the wish of it.
Okay, and would the stump dump be part of that survey or part of that discussion, do you know?
From what I have sat in on, I'd have to be honest and say probably not. It does not seem to be, but I think that's a good question to ask Rusty. Sitting in on the interviews, it really seemed about more on facilities and very little on fields. It was more of a facilities type needs and not as much about fields. But it is a portion of it. So I think what they do is have an inventory of it at that time.
I guess I'll ask that again next week, but I think what I'm thinking is what Patrick said, and that is, if for some reason that's not going to work, we need to be thinking about a Plan B. So it does,
And I think-
so
I
that
think-
doesn't delay this project.
I think that's timely that next week, I think you'll hear from the rec board on whether it's a very, very favorable site or just an okay site too. I think that's where they lay right now.
Kent, will the rec board perhaps make other recommendations? I mean, if that's not a viable site, is the rec board?
Yeah, they've constantly looked at sites. In all honesty, the rec board in the last 12 years for fields, including as far away as Lang Road, there are some rec properties there. All existing playground recreational fields has looked at it, and dimension-wise, whether it be softball fields or the other one is multi-purpose type fields, things run short in square footage. I mean, Plow Field, which I always think is, a nice big field, doesn't meet
the code
meet standards.
size. Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none. Do you have anything else to say?
No.
Okay, great. I would like to thank you for coming, and we appreciate this. This is wonderful. So just to summarize, the market conditions have helped us cut off about $2.5 or $6 million off the price. Good job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Bill.